I stream.
Hello and welcome to In Conversation on the developing situation in Egypt. In fact, the developing situation in the entire Middle East. And we have a panel for you who are familiar with the theme. On my right, former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal, but he's not here because he has been Foreign Secretary. He's here because he was, in fact, at a critical moment, Ambassador to Egypt. We shall turn to you, and of course Dr. Waiel Awwad, who knows that region very well. He has also been in jail for a few days while trying to cover that part of the world. Kanwal, has the so-called revolution run out of steam?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so because the problems in Egypt are very deep-rooted. President Mubarak has been in power for 30 years. The state of emergency is in force in Egypt for the last 30 years. He has not allowed political parties to function freely, independently. The Muslim Brotherhood is banned. Dissent is not tolerated. You can't criticize the president under law. Now, of course, there is a huge resentment because of the fact he wanted to put his son in power to succeed him. And there are a lot of allegations. When I was ambassador in Egypt, it was common talk about huge amounts of money that are being made by people around him, including his family. So because the depths of resentment and the reasons for resentment are so profound. And now, for the first time, this kind of an upsurge you see in the streets. I don't think in the present international climate and in the backdrop of the problems Egypt has, that this can be characterized as an uprising that risks to lose momentum. Even for a moment, if we accept that
if the people, Awwad, have even suffered it for 30 years, it becomes a habit. It becomes a national habit, it becomes a personal habit to live in repression. Mankind is a very durable quantity. He learns to live with it. If he's lived for 30 years under this horrendous dictatorship, why is the worm turning?
I think Lenin said it once that for decades things might not move, but if it moves in 1 week, it will stay for decades. And that's the case in Egypt. What happened in Egypt, it was already started in 2004. You know, when the things have started building up in the new youth, among the new youth in Egypt, and people wanted for a change, Kifaya came up enough, and they came onto the street and started asking for democracy, liberation of the society, removal of the emergency in Egypt. Then suddenly this built up, then it came the 6th April movement, which was carried out by the youth, who are now in the forefront, the Facebook revolution, 100,000.
The remarkable thing, Awwad, Kanwal, is that the leader of this particular youth movement is 29 years of age. Mm-hmm. In fact, the remarkable fact on which I would like both of you to comment is what they call the youth bulge. 350 million Arab population, of which 50% are in their 20s. A, how did this come about? And B, what are the implications?
Well, how did it come about? The same reason that it has come about in India. We also have a youth bulge, but of course we think it's something very positive, that we are a young population, 65% under the age of whatever it is, and that this is a huge human capital we have, which we can exploit in the future and which will help to propel us to a great economic power. So there is nothing wrong with having a young population, provided your economy is growing, you have the right policies, and you are capturing a share of the market, you are modernizing your economy, you are building up an economic base in your country, or for that matter, you're doing what some of these Gulf economies are doing. They're creating niche economies geared towards a long-term revenue-generating system when the oil runs out or whatever. So I don't think the youth bulge is a problem. Another reason, of course, is that population control in these countries
No, I
is
didn't
not
say
very
youth
effective.
bulge is a problem. I said this revolution is actually is riding the crest of this huge youth bulge.
Yes,
That
I would say, and I will add one point to what Mrs. Sibal is saying. It's very important to notice that the gap between Hosni Mubarak is 60 years between him and the 60% of the population. So you have a 3 generation of Egyptians who have been lost touch with their leadership. They have lost the touch with their leadership at least for the last 10 years of the ending of tenure of Hosni Mubarak. This has been exploited by other invested forces also. The young, they have no directions, they have no jobs, they are industry, they are educated, and they don't know what to do. So they have given...
Mrs. Sonia Gandhi must have anticipated all this when she said the other day that Congress leaders should retire at 64.
Yeah, but you know, he's absolutely right in terms of the gap in terms of generations between President Mubarak and the young people. But that would be almost true of India too.
Yes.
Our Prime Minister is 70, what, 8
You
or
know,
whatever.
let us look at it this way.
But the issue is democracy.
There was nothing on the face of it happening in Egypt. The ignition, the spark that ignited it all happened in Tunis. And people before, in the flash of an eye, everything was gone. He had packed up and left, and you had stories of people who had, in fact, with weights and measures, weighed that 150 tons of gold had been carried away by the lady. I don't know who weighed it and by what weighing machines, but it must be one hell of a gold-rich country, Saudi Arabia, which is where now she's gone. So ignition took place there. But the situation in Egypt is qualitatively different in various ways. A, the scales are different in terms of size of population.
Yeah, agree.
And second, the importance in the area. Don't forget that that is the fulcrum of stability as the West and Israel sees it, is the 1979 peace treaty with Israel. That is what infuses this particular development with much more interest than, say, Tunis was.
Yes, of course, because you're absolutely right in saying that Egypt is the political and cultural center of the Arab world. And if Egypt gets destabilized, the fallout of that in terms of regional stability, or for that matter, even to some extent, the global equilibrium of certain forces can get disrupted. Israel, as you know, has very powerful influence on US politics. And all these years since '79, Egypt has actually been, in a sense, kept out of the Arab-Israeli struggle because of the peace treaty. They have never been able to provide that kind of a leadership of the kind that some people may have wanted in terms of eradicating Israel from the map of the Middle East and stuff like that. He has provided leadership of a different kind in terms of moderation and stability and ensuring that the whole situation does not get out of control.
Use moderation.
Yes.
Moderation is the term you use.
Oh, absolutely. He's a moderate leader. Moderate in the sense of the Islamic politics. He's moderate, not in terms of his exercise of political power. He's an autocrat. He's not a moderate there. But from a certain perspective, the American perspective, the Israeli perspective, and perspective of so many, he has been a force for moderation. That is true. And now, whether this force for moderation has served Western interests principally and not the interests of the people of Egypt, because they have been repressed, that's a different issue. But purely in terms of strategic geopolitical thinking, I don't think it will be wrong to say that he has been a moderating force.
Isn't it a huge paradox that from the Israeli and the Western perspective, Israel, ringed by all these dictatorships who suppress their people, is a much better bet In other words, dictatorships around Israel ensures a kind of stability for Israel. It is exactly the opposite of the Wilsonian liberal ideal, you know, that democracy to flourish in my country must flourish elsewhere. It is exactly making that stand on its head, doesn't it?
You're asking me?
Yes.
You see, this has, we can't speak on the basis of empirical evidence. Let's say the Arab world have moved towards democracy, more representative government. And if it is true that democracies by nature are peaceful and don't enter into a conflict easily, and they impose constraints on the government which are not there in autocracies to be adventurous in foreign policy, then yes, one could say that a democratic Middle East could have lived in peace with Israel and found a solution so far to the problems by now. But we've not been able to test this. But what has happened is, I'll just complete that thought. What has happened is, because the West and the United States are seen as being the anchors for these autocratic regimes, this has generated opposition, but from Islamic quarters. Now, and there is fear that if those kind of people come to power through a democratic process, then the whole region can get destabilized, because they'll have a very different view on how to deal with Israel.
That is the problem. Awwad, you should be feeling seething with rage that what is being said is that you and your region is incapable of democracy. We shall come back.